Right, so Boris Johnson, it's now been some 6 months since he quit as Prime Minister. Hooray! Forced to do so under the weight of his own disgraceful antics whilst in power, and still scandal from that time is coming out. We're still not finished with it. There's just no end to the man's apparent immorality and abuse of his position. Only this time the BBC has been implicated, and this is just beautiful because it has exposed the BBC to be once more a blatant Tory propaganda tool for those of a mind to use it as such, and it's not anything like the independent and impartial news service it continues to claim to be. Now, as awful a politician as Johnson has always been, he's always appeared to be equally as bad with money, getting donors to pay for his wallpaper, for example, living rent-free in a mansion, just even today. No matter how awful he is, he always ends up falling upwards, and people just keep throwing money at him and keep giving him stuff. And now it's emerged that this profligate swine got another Tory donor, Richard Sharp, to help him arrange an £800,000 loan for him. What in God's name did Johnson need a loan that size for? Well, Sharp spoke with Cabinet Secretary Simon Case to facilitate an introduction between a multimillionaire Canadian friend of his to act as guarantor for this loan to Johnson. Why was Simon Case even involved? That man crops up everywhere. Some of you might remember the Sue Gray investigation into Partygate from last year, the one we were all rubbing our hands with glee and waiting with bated breath to find out just how bad things were for Boris Johnson. You might recall that, so will be interested to know even, that Simon Case should have been the person doing it as head of the Cabinet Office, but he had to excuse himself from conducting the investigation and let Sue Gray do it because he was at one of the parties himself. Now we find out he's arranging Johnson's personal finances as well? Rancid stuff. Case knew about Sharp's application to become BBC chair and apparently agreed to keep Sharp out of any further dealings to do with this loan. Big deal. There would have been no dealings to begin with without Richard Sharp's involvement. But in exchange for that arranged assistance, Johnson appears to have had Sharp installed as BBC chairman. There was uproar at the time, of course. If you got your news in the right places, that is, i.e. not from mainstream sources who wouldn't have said a damn thing about it. Well-known donor as Richard Sharp has been to the Tory party, but he's a long way from being the only Tory that's been installed in that institution. The current BBC Director General is a chap called Tim Davie. He once stood as a Tory councillor. News programme editor Robbie Gibb, who used to oversee the BBC's political news output, the likes of the Andrew Marr Show and Newsnight, quit to become Theresa May's Director of Communications, and indeed his brother Nick Gibb is a current serving Tory MP. And after May's fall and a brief stint at GB News, because that's Robbie Gibb's vote, he returned to join the BBC board, blocking appointments of journalists to the BBC who he felt might damage the BBC's relations with government. I thought they were supposed to hold government to account. I thought they were supposed to be independent and impartial. Well, when even the likes of Emily Maitlis, of all people, felt compelled to call Gibb out as an active agent of the Conservative Party, he's hardly a sign of that coveted impartiality and independence the BBC loves to cling to, becoming ever more a laughingstock every time it does. The list of Tory appointments goes on as you go back in time with the BBC. The institution has always functionally done the bidding of the government of the day because they control their funding. That word independent, it does a lot of heavy lifting, and when applied to politics, usually proves to be completely dishonest in its usage. So, Richard Sharp's appointment was nothing new to the BBC, really, but the circumstances that have now come to light leading to that appointment stink. An investigation has been launched, and thank God it doesn't have to be done by Rishi Sunak's Sleaze, because I doubt Sunak would issue the necessary permission for it to go ahead. You see, before Rishi Sunak entered politics, he was, of course, an investment banker. It's where he made all his money, or some of it anyway, before he married a billionaire heiress. But he used to work for Goldman Sachs, and his boss there was Richard Sharp. In fact, there's not one but two investigations going on here. One by the BBC itself, which should be hilarious and will no doubt exonerate itself of any wrongdoing whatsoever. But the other is being probed by the Commissioner for Public Appointments, despite protestations from the Cabinet Office that their selection process had been rigorous. Yeah, Simon Case again, I suppose. Anyway, they can claim all procedures were followed. They can claim no red flags came up. But the biggest red flag going was that a man who has for years donated hundreds of thousands of pounds to the Conservative Party got awarded such a position, even more so when the Tories in power. Knowing that even more so the BBC is being controlled by the Tory party and by wealthy individuals of significant means for whom a Tory government is one that runs the country in their interests and never in ours. Sharp is, of course, confident that the aforementioned rigorous, clean and thorough appointment will exonerate him, and as such refuses to stand down whilst he is being investigated. And the BBC, in its open and independent way, its thorough impartiality, its fearlessness to scrutinise itself, of course, covered the story on Sunday's round of Koonsberg, the Koonsberg Sunday morning propaganda show, and brought on Boris Johnson's sister to interview over it, along with Tory MP Dr. Death Ian Duncan Smith and the chairman of Tesco. Oh, so Rachel Johnson is an independence journalist, is she? It's that ruddy word again. Independent nothing. She's Boris Johnson's flaming sister, for heaven's sake. Sharp should be completely undone by this, as everyone who has had anything to do with a walking scandal like Boris Johnson should. He never declared his involvement with Johnson's personal finances to the appointments panel. Therefore, by rights, his appointment should be nullified because he withheld information relating to what I certainly think is a blatant conflict of interest. Even if he does go, though, the problem at the BBC remains, and for as long as it is controlled by any government of the day, cannot be trusted in its news output to be anything other than pro-government biased. It should be the last port of call for anyone wishing to be kept properly informed when it comes to the running of this country.